the assembly of stars. The galactic concordat had stood for 11,000 years, an empire of 73 species bound by iron law and enforced peace. At its heart floated the zenithum, a space station the size of a moon, where the Council of Hierarchs made decisions that shaped quadrants. Commander Thrace Kelvin of the Terran Diplomatic Corps stood in the observation gallery, watching through crystalline walls as warships from a dozen worlds performed their synchronized patrols. Each vessel bore the sigil of the Concordat, a circle of stars around a closed fist. Impressive, isn't it? The voice belonged to Ambassador Yara Castellanos, Thrace's superior and Earth's chief representative to the Concordat. She was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. All that power, all that control. And humanity gets to watch from the sidelines. Thrace turned from the window. We've only been members for 20 years, Ambassador. The hierarchs say we need to prove ourselves worthy of a council seat. The hierarchs say many things. Yara's smile was bitter. What they mean is that we're too unpredictable, too chaotic, too democratic. The word democratic was spoken like a curse throughout Concordat space. Every other member species was governed by some variation of autocracy, genetic nobility among the Vexians, corporate plutocracy for the Meridax, theocratic rule for the Kesthera. Humanity's insistence on representative government was viewed as a charming primitive custom, like the Tolmec practice of ritual scarification or the Brayan habit of singing genealogies. A chime echoed through the gallery. All delegations to the Grand Chamber, announced a synthetic voice. Emergency session convenes in 10 minutes. Yara and Thrace exchanged glances. Emergency sessions were rare. The last one had been 4 years ago when the Outer Rim rebellions threatened Concordat mining operations. The Grand Chamber was a cathedral of political power. 73 platforms arranged in concentric circles, each holding the delegation from a member world. The inner ring belonged to the hierarchs, the 12 species who had founded the Concordat and who alone could issue binding edicts. Supreme Hierarch Vornathel of the Azurith Empire stood at the chamber's center, his crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns. The Azurith were silicon-based beings who lived for centuries and whose patience was legendary. That Vornathel looked agitated sent whispers rippling through the assembled delegates. Members of the Concordat, his voice resonated through translation nodes embedded in every platform, we face a threat unlike any in our history. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected an approaching armada. Origin unknown. Intent hostile. Scale unprecedented. Holographic displays materialized above the chamber floor. Thrace felt his breath catch. The fleet was massive, thousands of ships and formations that suggested military discipline and overwhelming force. They call themselves the Dominion Ascendant, Vornathel continued. Their message was simple: submit or be exterminated. They have given us 30 standard days to surrender. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted questions, demanded action, or simply expressed disbelief. Thrace watched Yara's face harden into the expression she wore when making difficult decisions. Hierarch Kesmora of the Vexian Armada rose, her serpentine form coiling with barely controlled fury. We have the most powerful military force in known space. We crush these Dominion pretenders before they reach our borders. Agreement rumbled from the warrior species. The Kesthera, the Brutharch, the Meridax Warcast, all voiced support for immediate retaliation. But Hierarch Quintel of the Scholarium raised a tentacle for attention. Our analysts have reviewed the scans. The Dominion fleet possesses technology that rivals or exceeds our own. A direct confrontation could devastate both sides. We must consider negotiation. Negotiation is surrender, Kesmora hissed. We are the Concordat. We do not negotiate with invaders. The debate raged for hours. Some species advocated for fortifying defenses. Others suggested buying time through diplomacy while preparing for war. The hierarchs remained divided, and in the Concordat, a divided council meant paralysis. Finally, Vornathel called for order. This decision affects all members equally. Each species will consult their governments. We reconvene in 5 days with proposals. As the session adjourned, Thrace followed Yara through corridors filled with anxious delegates. What will Earth propose? He asked. Yara stopped walking. I honestly don't know. This is beyond any single person's authority to decide. This requires. She paused as if the word itself was revolutionary. A vote. A vote? Thrace blinked. You mean a referendum? For all of Earth. Every human 16 or older. Every colony, every station, every settlement. If we're going to war, Or peace, it should be humanity's choice, not just mine. She smiled grimly. Let's see what the hierarchs think of democracy when it actually matters. Around them, other delegations hurried past, carrying the weight of decisions that would be made in throne rooms and corporate boardrooms and temple sanctums. Decisions made by the few for the many. For the first time in 11,000 years, one species would ask its people what they wanted. And the galaxy was about to discover what that meant. The impossible proposal. The Terran delegation's quarters occupied a modest sector of the zenithum, reflecting humanity's junior status in the Concordat. Thrace sat in the strategy room while Yara initiated a quantum-encrypted link to Geneva, where the United Nations Assembly was in emergency session. On the view screen, Secretary General Amara Okonkwo's face showed the strain of 12 hours of continuous debate. Ambassador Castellanos, the Assembly is deeply divided. 60 nations want immediate military mobilization. 40 prefer diplomatic solutions. The rest are paralyzed with fear. Which is exactly why we need to ask everyone, Yara said firmly. Not just the diplomats and generals. Every human deserves a voice in this. Director LSS Curry from the Security Council leaned into frame. The logistics are impossible. 8 billion people across Earth, Mars, Luna, the Belt colonies, the generation ships, the research stations. Even with quantum communication, organizing a referendum in 5 days is insane. Then we'd better start now, Yara replied. Thrace pulled up the latest census data. We have secure voting infrastructure on Earth and Mars. The colonies have local systems. If we coordinate with the Electoral Commission. No. Yara interrupted. Not the Electoral Commission. Not any single institution. This needs to be transparent, verifiable, and absolutely trustworthy. We'll need international observers, blockchain verification, public counting in every district. If we're making this argument to the Concordat, the process itself has to be unimpeachable. On screen, Okonkwo nodded slowly. You're asking for the largest democratic exercise in human history. During a crisis. With the fate of our species hanging in the balance. Yes, Yara said simply. I am. A long silence fell. Finally, Okonkwo spoke. I'll propose it to the Assembly. If we get majority support, we can have voting centers operational within 72 hours. But Ambassador, what exactly are we voting on? Yara had prepared for this. 3 options. 1. Support military alliance with the Concordat against the Dominion. 2. Pursue independent diplomatic contact with the Dominion. 3. Withdraw from the Concordat and declare neutrality. Thrace's head snapped toward her. Withdrawal? Ambassador, that's an option, Yara cut him off. People deserve real choices, not rubber stamps. If humanity votes for neutrality, we'll respect that. The meeting ended with uncertain agreement. Earth would attempt the impossible, a planet-wide vote in 5 days. Thrace wondered if Yara understood the chaos this would unleash. He got his answer the next morning when the zenithum erupted into pandemonium. News of Earth's referendum had spread through the station like radiation from a reactor breach. Delegates from other species crowded the Terran quarters, their reactions ranging from confusion to outrage. Hierarch Quintel of the Scholarium arrived with an entourage of scholars. The elderly being's many eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of deep perturbation. Ambassador Castellanos, we must speak privately. In Yara's office, Quintel settled its bulk into a specially designed chair. What you are proposing is dangerous. Not militarily, politically. You are suggesting that 8 billion individuals, most with no military training or diplomatic experience, should make strategic decisions. With respect, Hierarch, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. But how can they possibly know the correct course of action? They lack context, classified intelligence, strategic analysis. They lack nothing, Yara interrupted gently. They are the people who will live or die based on this decision. That gives them all the authority they need. Quintel's translator struggled with what seemed to be stammering. This is unprecedented. The Concordat has maintained stability precisely because decisions are made by those qualified to make them. And how's that working out? Yara asked. Your qualified decision-makers have been arguing for 3 days without reaching consensus. Meanwhile, the Dominion fleet gets closer. Before Quintel could respond, Thrace's communicator chimed urgently. Ambassador, you need to see this. Now. The Grand Chamber's observation deck overlooked the diplomatic quarter. Thrace pointed to the plaza below, where something remarkable was happening. Delegations were gathering, not for formal sessions but in informal groups. The Tolmec were speaking with Abrayan. The Meridax commercial cast had cornered some Kesthera priests. Everywhere, species that normally interacted only through rigid protocols were engaged in heated discussion. They're debating, Yara breathed. They're actually debating what Earth should do. More than that, Thrace said, pulling up his data tablet. Look at the Concordat communication networks. Traffic is up 600%. Public forums on every member world are exploding with discussion about the referendum. Quintel had followed them to the deck. The hierarch observed the scene below with what might have been wonder. They are arguing about your vote as if it were their own. I have never seen anything like this. Over the next 3 days, the galaxy watched humanity prepare for its referendum. News feeds from Earth showed voting centers being constructed in schools and community centers. Debate moderators hosted discussions broadcast across the solar system. Political organizers from every nation worked around the clock to ensure accessibility. The Concordat species observed with fascination. For civilizations governed by unchanging hierarchies, the spectacle of billions of individuals engaging in collective decision-making was utterly alien. Some delegations saw opportunity. The Vexian military attaché, Commander Sarthex, approached Thrace in the diplomatic quarter. Your people understand strength. I have prepared materials explaining why military alliance is the only logical choice. Where should I send them for distribution? Thrace smiled politely. We don't distribute propaganda, Commander. People will make up their own minds. Sarthex's scales rippled with irritation. Then how will they know what to think? They'll think for themselves. That's the point. Not everyone was supportive. A coalition of conservative hierarchs issued a formal complaint, arguing that Earth's referendum violated Concordat protocols by introducing mob rule into interstellar governance. Yara responded with a forward message, "Watch us." On Earth the debate raged. Warhawks argued that the Dominion represented an existential threat requiring immediate military response. Pacifists insisted on exhausting all diplomatic options before considering violence. Isolationists demanded withdrawal from what they saw as someone else's war. The arguments were passionate, sometimes ugly, occasionally brilliant. But they were real. Billions of humans engaged with the most important question they had ever faced. What kind of species did they want to be? In the Grand Chamber, Vornathel called another session. The Supreme Hierarch looked exhausted, his crystalline form dim with fatigue. The Dominion has sent another message. They have accelerated their approach. We now have 20 days before they reach Concordat space. Panic rippled through the delegations. 20 days instead of 30 meant less time to prepare, less time to build defenses, less time to decide. When will Earth's vote conclude? Vornathel asked Yara. 2 days, she replied calmly. Polls close in 48 hours. Results will be certified within 12 hours after that. And if your people choose withdrawal? If they abandon the Concordat in our hour of need? Yara met his gaze steadily. Then we'll withdraw. That's what voting means, Supreme Hierarch. You ask the question and you accept the answer. The chamber fell silent. For 11,000 years, the Concordat had operated on certainty. Hierarchs decreed. Citizens obeyed. The idea that a decision of such magnitude could be left to chance, to the whims of billions, was terrifying to species who had eliminated such chaos millennia ago. But as Thrace looked around the chamber, he saw something else in the eyes of the assembled delegates. Something that looked almost like envy. For the first time in 11,000 years, someone had asked the people what they wanted. And in 2 days the galaxy would learn what they said. The voice of billions. The final day of voting on Earth dawned with unprecedented turnout. Satellite feeds showed lines stretching around blocks in Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Lagos, and New Shanghai. On Mars, colonists voted in their habitation domes. In the asteroid belt, miners transmitted their ballots from deep space drilling platforms. Thrace monitored the feeds from the Zenithum's communication center, watching humanity exercise its voice. The scenes were chaotic and beautiful. People arguing at polling stations, friends debating in queues, families making decisions together. Lieutenant Kendra Vasquez, Thrace's communications officer, looked up from her console. Commander, we're getting something strange. Multiple delegations are requesting access to Earth's voting feeds. How many? 47 species so far. They want to watch the vote. Thrace blinked. Watch people vote? Why? They say. Kendra checked her screen. They say they've never seen anything like it before. Yara authorized the access. Within hours, the feeds were being broadcast across the Concordat. Beings from 73 worlds watched humans stand in line, mark ballots, and engage in passionate debate about the future of their species. On the Vexian homeworld, military academies showed the footage in tactical courses, examining how undisciplined masses could somehow organize themselves. On the Kesthara temple ships, priests studied the spectacle as a theological curiosity. Even the pragmatic Meridax corporations analyzed the data, trying to understand what market forces could drive such behavior. The Scholarium delegation set up viewing parties in their quarters. Thrace found Quintel surrounded by junior scholars, all watching feeds from different Earth cities. "Do you understand what you're seeing?" the hierarch asked Thrace. "My people exercising their rights?" "No." Quintel's eyes swirled with colors Thrace's translator couldn't interpret. "We are seeing proof that chaos can create order. Look, no central authority enforcing compliance, yet millions queue peacefully. No military ensuring security, yet violence is virtually non-existent. No algorithmic optimization, yet the system functions." A young scholar chittered excitedly. "On Meridax Prime, our voting, for corporate board positions of course, requires armed security and identity verification at every step. The fraud rate still exceeds 11%. Earth's preliminary audits show less than 0.02% irregularities. Because people believe in it," Thrace said. "When citizens trust the system, they protect it themselves." Quintel was quiet for a long time. "That may be the most radical thing I have ever heard." As the voting period closed, election officials across human space began the count. The Concordat species watched this too, fascinated by the transparency. Every ballot was counted publicly, verified by multiple observers, and recorded on distributed ledgers that anyone could audit. Commander Sarthex of the Vexian military watched from the diplomatic gallery, his scales rippling with agitation. "This is absurd. On my world, the War Council decides and citizens comply. Plain. Efficient. No arguments." Beside him, a Brayan cultural liaison named Thissa hummed thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But when did your people last trust their War Council?" Sarthex turned sharply. "Trust is irrelevant. Obedience is what matters." "Is it?" Thissa gestured to the screen showing Earth. "These humans are obeying something far more powerful than any council. They're obeying an idea." The count took 8 hours. As results came in from different regions, patterns emerged. The younger generation favored diplomatic engagement with the Dominion. Military families split between supporting the Concordat and withdrawing to defend Earth specifically. The Mars colonies leaned heavily toward neutrality, while the Belt miners wanted to fight. In the strategy room, Yara, Thrace, and the senior staff watched the numbers accumulate. "It's going to be close," Kendra reported. "We're seeing three-way splits in major population centers. Some regions are within half a percentage point." Yara sat very still, her hands folded on the table. Thrace realized she was nervous, truly nervous, for the first time since he'd known her. "Whatever they choose," she said quietly, "we honor it. No second-guessing, no political maneuvering. The people speak, we listen." The final results came through at 0327 hours Zenithum Standard Time. Option 1, Military Alliance with the Concordat, 38.7%. Option 2, Independent Diplomatic Engagement, 34.1%. Option 3, Withdrawal and Neutrality, 27.2%. The war option had won. Barely. By less than 5 percentage points across 8 billion votes. The communications center erupted in controlled chaos as staff began preparing the official announcement. Thrace felt something between relief and trepidation. Humanity would stand with the Concordat. They would face the Dominion together. But as he watched Yara's face, he saw something else there. Not triumph or vindication, but a deep, solemn weight. "Commander," she said softly, "prepare my formal response to the Concordat Council." Within the hour, Ambassador Yara Castellanos stood before the Grand Chamber. Every delegation was present. This was too important to miss. "Members of the Concordat," Yara's voice was steady, "the people of Earth have spoken. By majority vote, humanity chooses military alliance. We will stand with you against the Dominion Ascendant." Vornathal's crystalline form glowed brighter. "This is welcome news, Ambassador. Earth's fleets will bolster our defenses significantly." "I'm not finished," Yara continued. "We accept this alliance with specific conditions." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Conditions were not customary in Concordat politics. First, all human military forces remain under human command. We will coordinate with Concordat strategy, but our people take orders from our officers. Hierarch Kesmora's serpentine form coiled with irritation. This violates integrated command protocols. Second, Yara spoke over her, any escalation beyond defensive operations requires another vote. Earth will fight to defend Concordat space. We will not participate in wars of conquest or retribution without consulting our people. Absurd. Commander Sarthax stood from his delegation platform. War demands decisive action, not constant referendums. Third, Yara continued calmly, and most important, the Concordat Council will establish a citizens' forum where representatives from all member species can observe and provide input on strategic decisions. The chamber exploded. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages, their translators struggling to keep up with the cacophony. Vornathel's voice boomed over the chaos. Silence. The supreme hierarch turned to Yara, his crystalline features rigid. Ambassador, you overstep. Drastically. The structure of Concordat governance has stood for 11 millennia. You propose fundamental changes based on one vote. Yes, Yara said simply. Because that one vote represents something you've forgotten. The people you govern have voices. Opinions. The right to know what's being done in their name. My people voted to fight. But they voted knowing they'd have transparency and accountability. Without those conditions, the vote is meaningless. Quintel rose from the Scholarium delegation. Supreme Hierarch, if I may, the ambassador makes an interesting point. We've asked much of our citizens, taxes, military service, adherence to laws. But we've rarely asked what they think. Perhaps it's time we did. This is chaos, Kesmora hissed. Governance by committee. Decision-making by the uninformed masses. The masses aren't uninformed, Thrace found himself speaking before he'd meant to. They live with the consequences of your decisions. That makes them the most informed people in the galaxy. The debate raged for 6 hours. In the end, Vornathel called for a recess. The hierarchs would deliberate in private. They returned 4 hours later. Vornathel looked as though he'd aged a century. The Council of Hierarchs has considered Earth's conditions. We accept them. All of them. Earth's forces will maintain independent command while coordinating with Concordat strategy. Escalation beyond defensive operations will require consultation with member populations. And we will establish a citizens' forum with observer status at council sessions. The chamber fell silent with shock. No one had expected complete capitulation. Why? Yara asked, genuinely surprised. Vornathel's laugh was bitter. Because, Ambassador, for the first time in 11,000 years, someone gave us a reason to hope. We have fleets, massive, powerful, technologically superior fleets. But the Dominion has fleets too. You showed us something we'd forgotten we could have, the will of our people behind us. He gestured to the assembled delegates. Look at them. For 3 days they've done nothing but watch your vote, discuss it, debate it. Species that haven't spoken directly to each other in centuries are arguing about what democracy means. You've reminded the galaxy that governments exist to serve people, not the other way around. Quintel added softly, and you've given us a weapon the Dominion doesn't have. Unity born from choice, not compulsion. Yara nodded slowly. Then we'd better prepare. We have 17 days until the Dominion arrives. 16, Vornathel corrected. They accelerated again while we were deliberating. As the session adjourned, Thrace found himself surrounded by junior delegates from other species. They asked questions rapid fire. How did human voting work? Could their species implement something similar? What if their governments refused? A young Tolmec named Rissith grabbed Thrace's arm. On my world, the Breeding Council makes all decisions based on genetic optimization. I've never voted for anything. Never been asked what I want. After seeing your referendum, I want that. How do I get that? Thrace had no easy answer. You ask. You organize. You show your leaders that their people have voices worth hearing. And if they say no? Then you ask louder. As Thrace made his way back to the Terran quarters, he realized something profound had shifted. Earth's vote wasn't just about the Dominion. It was about showing the galaxy that there were different ways to govern, different ways to make decisions, different ways to be. The question was whether that would be enough when the Dominion fleet arrived. They had 16 days to find out. The Forum of Voices. The Citizens' Forum convened for the first time in a repurposed cargo bay. The Grand Chamber wasn't designed for the number of beings who wanted to attend. Representatives from 62 species crowded the space, most of them junior functionaries, cultural liaisons, or scientific attaches who'd never had access to council deliberations before. Thrace stood at the back, watching Yara moderate the session with the exhausted patience of someone managing controlled chaos. A Brayan agricultural specialist named Thissa was speaking. My government sent me here to observe, nothing more. But I must say, after watching Earth's referendum, I returned to my colony ship and asked what our people wanted. The response was overwhelming. We have opinions, concerns, ideas. We've just never been asked. Same with the mining caste, rumbled a Meridax engineer called Drexval. We process or for Concordat shipyards. We live near potential battlegrounds. But no one asked if we wanted war or peace. We were simply told production quotas would increase. Vornathel observed from a raised platform, his crystalline form dim with what might have been discomfort. Beside him, Kesmora looked openly hostile. This is pointless sentiment, the Vexian hierarch declared. We have 16 days until the Dominion arrives. We need battle plans, not feelings. Quintel shifted his bulk. Perhaps battle plans require feelings. If our citizens don't believe in what they're fighting for, can we win? Belief is irrelevant when facing superior firepower, Kesmora shot back. Yara intervened smoothly. Then let's discuss the firepower. Fleet Admiral Torrance, your assessment? Admiral Helena Torrance, commander of the Terran Space Defense Force, projected tactical displays above the forum floor. A veteran of the Belt Wars, she had the efficient manner of someone who'd spent more time on warships than planets. Combined Concordat forces number approximately 48,000 combat vessels, she began. The Dominion fleet is estimated at 62,000. They have numerical superiority and, based on our scans, equivalent or better technology. Murmurs of concern rippled through the forum. However, Torrance continued, they're operating far from their supply lines. Long-range warfare favors defenders. If we can hold them at the border systems and disrupt their logistics, we might force a stalemate. Might? Kesmora's tone was scathing. We need certainty, not might. War doesn't offer certainty, Torrance replied coolly. Only probabilities. A Kesthera priest named Velshera spoke up, his translator carrying tones of spiritual distress. Has anyone attempted communication with the Dominion? To understand their motives? They communicated their motives clearly, Sarthax said. Submit or die. What else is there to understand? Their reason for demanding submission, Velshera persisted. Every conflict has roots. Fear, resources, ideology. If we knew what drove them. It doesn't matter, Kesmora cut him off. They're coming. We fight. But Thrace noticed Quintel making notes with several tentacles simultaneously. The Scholarium hierarch looked thoughtful. Over the next 10 days, the Citizens' Forum became the heart of war preparations. It wasn't official authority, the hierarch still made final decisions. But it was the place where information flowed, where questions were asked, where reality was discussed without political theater. Representatives shared intelligence from their home systems. The Tolmec reported unusual Dominion movements near frontier outposts. The Brayan colony ships, with their advanced sensor arrays, mapped the approaching fleet's formation. The Meridax corporations provided resource allocation data that revealed vulnerabilities in Concordat supply chains. More importantly, they shared the concerns of their people. The frontier colonies are terrified, reported a Bruthark security officer named Karnhex. They're evacuating civilians, but there's not enough transport. Some planetary governors are demanding we negotiate surrender to save lives. My research station wants to know why we're not considering retreat, added a Scholarium scientist. We could withdraw to defend its systems, force the Dominion to overextend. Retreat is cowardice, Kesmora snapped. Retreat is tactics, Torrance corrected. And it's being considered. We've identified 12 strategic fallback positions. But evacuating frontier worlds would take weeks. We don't have weeks. Thrace watched these exchanges with growing fascination. The forum wasn't efficient like the Council of Hierarchs. It was messy, argumentative, sometimes repetitive. But it was also comprehensive in a way the hierarchical system could never be. Different perspectives collided and combined into understanding no single viewpoint could achieve. On day 12, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rissith, the young Tolmec delegate who'd grabbed Thrace's arm after the vote, burst into the forum waving a data pad. I think I know what the Dominion wants. Quintel looked up from a strategic briefing. Explain. I was reviewing historical databases. The Scholarium opened your archives to forum members, remember? I found references to a species called the Ascendant Collective. They existed 3,000 years ago on the other side of the galaxy. Their government structure matches the Dominion's exactly. Quintel's eyes widened in multiple spectrums. The Ascendant Collective. I remember. They were a hierarchical empire that conquered 70 systems before they were destroyed by a democratic uprising, Risseth finished. Their subject species revolted, overthrew the ascendants, and established a federation based on representative government. It took decades, but they won. Silence fell over the forum. You think the Dominion is what remains of the ascendants? Yara asked carefully. Or their descendants, Risseth said. Rebuilding their empire. And they see the Concordat as a threat because we're hierarchical too, but we just established a citizens' forum, Thrace breathed. We're showing that change is possible. That empires can become more democratic. Velshera the priest spoke softly. They're not fighting to conquer us. They're fighting to prevent what happened to them from happening again. They see democratic influence as an existential threat. That's insane, Sarthex protested. They're afraid of democracy, so they're starting a war? Fear makes empires do insane things, Yara said quietly. The question is, does this give us leverage? Admiral Torrance frowned. How? We can't exactly tell them, don't worry, most of us are autocracies too. Not after establishing the forum. No, Quintel said slowly. But we could tell them that choice, real choice, is not a threat. That it makes civilization stronger, not weaker. Kesmora laughed harshly. You want to win a war with philosophy lectures? I want to avoid a war with understanding, Quintel countered. If Risseth is right, the Dominion is acting from trauma. A dressing that is smarter than matching fleet against fleet. Vornathel, who had been silent, finally spoke. The hierarchs will consider this analysis. But we cannot bet everything on diplomacy. Admiral Torrance, continue military preparations. Already underway, Torrance confirmed. But Supreme Hierarch, if we're going to try diplomacy, time is running out. The Dominion fleet will be in range of our border systems in 4 days. Then we send an envoy immediately, Vornathel decided. Someone who can speak credibly about democratic principles and the Citizens' Forum. Someone the Dominion might listen to. Every eye in the forum turned to Yara. She smiled without humor. Of course, the human. Because if this fails and the envoy gets vaporized, better to lose the junior species than a hierarch. Actually, Quintel said gently, because you're the only one of us who truly believes in what you're saying. The Dominion will sense that. It might matter. Yara was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll need a small ship, a skilled pilot, and a communication specialist fluent in ancient ascendant dialects. And someone who can convince me this isn't a suicide mission. I'll pilot, Thrace said immediately. He hadn't planned to volunteer, but the words came out before he could stop them. I can handle communications, Kendra Vasquez added. I specialized in xenolinguistics at the academy. Yara looked at them both. You understand that if the Dominion refuses to talk, we'll be in weapons range of their entire fleet with no backup? Yes, Ambassador, Thrace and Kendra said in unison. Then we leave in 6 hours. Quintel, I need everything you have on the Ascendant Collective and their fall. Velshera, I want cultural context, psychological profiles if you have them. Torrance, a ship that's fast enough to run if this goes wrong. The forum erupted into coordinated activity. Beings who 3 weeks ago had never spoken to each other now worked together with desperate urgency. Thrace found himself next to Risseth, who looked equal parts excited and terrified. I can't believe they're actually trying this. Your research might save millions of lives, Thrace said. Or get us all killed if I'm wrong. The young Tolmec scales were pale with stress. Welcome to democracy, Thrace replied. We make our best guess and live with the consequences. As the Terran delegation prepared for departure, Thrace watched the Citizens' Forum continue its work. Representatives argued over evacuation priorities, debated defensive strategies, and shared intelligence with a transparency that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Above them, the hierarchs observed. Vornathel looked thoughtful. Kesmora looked disgusted. But even she was listening. The vote hadn't just changed Earth's role in the Concordat. It had changed the Concordat itself. The question was whether that change had come in time. In 4 days they'd find out. The meeting in the void. The courier ship Meridian Runner was designed for speed, not comfort. Thrace sat in the pilot's seat, running pre-flight calculations while Yara and Kendra prepared in the cramped cabin behind him. Admiral Torrance's voice came through the comm. You're cleared for departure, Meridian. Try to come back alive. We'll do our best, Admiral, Thrace replied, engaging the quantum drives. The zenithum fell away behind them as they accelerated toward the edge of Concordat space. Ahead lay the vast emptiness between civilizations, and somewhere in that void the Dominion fleet. Kendra had converted the ship's cargo hold into a communications center. Holographic displays showed real-time translations of ancient Ascendant texts, cultural analysis from Velshera's research, and strategic assessments from Quintel's archives. The Ascendants had a concept called sovereignty absolute, Kendra explained, highlighting a passage. The idea that hierarchical rule was the only natural form of government. Any system that distributed power was seen as chaos, a violation of cosmic order. Yara studied the texts with intense focus. They didn't just fear democracy. They considered it blasphemy. Which makes their defeat by democratic movements even more traumatic, Thrace added. They didn't just lose territory. Their entire worldview was proven wrong. And now they're back, Yara said softly, trying to restore that worldview by force. Wonderful. 3 days into their journey, they detected the Dominion fleet. The sensor display showed a formation that defied conventional military logic. The ships were arranged not for tactical advantage but in concentric rings, like a fortress or a temple. Defensive formation, Thrace observed. They're not charging in for conquest. They're protecting something. Themselves, Yara realized. They're scared. All that firepower, all that aggression, it's armor against a threat they can't fight with weapons. She activated the communications array. This is Ambassador Yara Castellanos of Earth, representing the Galactic Concordat. We request peaceful dialogue with the Dominion Ascendant. Silence. They waited 20 minutes, an eternity in the void. Thrace's hands hovered over the helm controls, ready to execute emergency evasion if weapons locked onto them. Then a response came. The voice was mechanical, filtered through translation protocols that stripped away all emotion. Ambassador Castellanos. Why do you come alone? Where are your fleets? I come without fleets precisely because I seek understanding, not war, Yara replied. We've learned things about your history. About the Ascendant Collective and what happened to them. Another pause. When the voice returned, it carried what might have been surprise. You know of the Collective? We know they were destroyed by the very thing you fear. Democratic movements among their subject species. And we know you're trying to prevent that from happening again. Then you understand why we cannot tolerate your infection. Yara leaned toward the calm. Infection? Democracy isn't a disease. It's a choice. Choice is chaos. The mechanical voice grew heated. The Collective learned this. They permitted choice among their subjects, small freedoms, minor autonomies. Those freedoms metastasized into revolution. Billions died. Entire species were exterminated in the upheaval. The survivors fled here to the rim, where we could rebuild without the poison of distributed authority. Kendra muted the transmission and whispered urgently. Ambassador, historical records show the Ascendant collapse was brutal. 20-year war, widespread atrocities on both sides. Their fear isn't irrational, it's based on lived trauma. Yara unmuted. I understand your fear. I do. But you're making the same mistake the Collective made. They didn't fall because they gave people choices. They fell because they waited too long, gave too little, and then tried to take it back when their subjects wanted more. The violence came from resistance to change, not from change itself. Easy words from someone whose species has never been annihilated. You're right, Yara said. Humanity hasn't been annihilated. But we've faced extinction events. We've had empires rise and fall. We've made every political mistake imaginable, tyranny, anarchy, everything in between. And we learned that the only sustainable system is one where people have a voice in their own governance. Sustainable until it collapses into mob rule and self-destruction. Yara's voice hardened. Is that what you see in the Concordat? Mob rule? We established a citizens' forum. Representatives from 73 species discussing strategic decisions together. Is that chaos or is that billions of beings finding common ground? It is the beginning of what destroyed us. No, Yara countered. It's the beginning of what could have saved you. If the Ascendant Collective had listened to their subjects instead of suppressing them, if they'd shared power before revolution became the only option, they might still exist. You're so focused on preventing the past that you're guaranteeing you'll repeat it. The transmission cut off abruptly. Thrace checked his sensors. Multiple ships breaking from the Dominion formation. Heading toward us. Weapons status? Yara asked calmly. Not locked on yet. But they're definitely interested in us. 20 Dominion cruisers surrounded the Meridian Runner in a sphere formation. Close enough to destroy them instantly but not actively threatening. The mechanical voice returned, but this time Thrace detected something beneath the filtering. A real voice, old and tired. You speak of sharing power. But you speak from the position of those who already have it. Your ambassador rank, your military forces, your seat in the Concordat, these are power structures, hierarchies. You are not truly democratic. You are hierarchs pretending at equality. Yara was quiet for a moment. Then she did something extraordinary. She activated the full visual transmission, showing not just audio but her face, her surroundings, her humanity. You're right, she said. I am an ambassador. I have rank and authority and access to power most people don't. But here's what's different about democratic systems. I got this position through a process that required the consent of those I represent. And if I abuse that power, they can remove me. Not through revolution or violence, but through votes. She pulled up her personal communicator, showing the referendum results that had brought them here. 3 weeks ago, my entire species voted on whether to fight alongside the Concordat. 38% chose my position. 34% wanted something different. 27% wanted to walk away entirely. I have this authority because 62% trusted me enough not to choose isolation. Barely. If I'd advocated for war and lost the vote, I'd have followed the people's decision, even if it meant resigning. Words, the voice said, but with less certainty. Promises that evaporate when tested. Then test them, Yara challenged. Send observers to the Concordat. Watch the Citizens Forum in action. See how we argue, compromise, and find solutions together. You're convinced democracy leads to chaos. Prove it. If you're right, you'll have evidence. If you're wrong, maybe you'll see a different path. Silence stretched for long minutes. Thrace watched the Dominion ships maintain their position, neither advancing nor retreating. Finally, the voice spoke again, and this time the filtering was gone. It was an organic voice, ancient, weary, haunted. My name is Patriarch Zendar. I am 317 years old. I was a child when the collective fell. I watched my world burn as democratic revolutionaries executed anyone associated with the old government. My family, my friends, my culture, all destroyed in the name of liberty. I'm sorry, Yara said, and meant it. Truly. No one should experience that. And yet you ask me to embrace the same ideology that killed them. No. I'm asking you to see the difference between revolution born of desperation and democracy built on consent. The collective subjects didn't revolt because they loved democracy. They revolted because they had no other choice. You can give your own people a choice before they feel the need to take it by force. And if they choose to abandon our ways? To dismantle everything we've rebuilt? Yara smiled sadly. Then that's their choice. But in my experience, people who feel heard don't usually choose destruction. They choose reform. Evolution. They keep what works and change what doesn't. Another long silence. I will consult with the Council of Patriarchs, Zendar said finally. You will wait here. If you attempt to leave or signal the Concordat, we will destroy you. Understood, Yara replied. The transmission ended. The Dominion ships maintained their sphere around the Meridian runner, watchful and waiting. Thrace exhaled slowly. That went better than expected. We're still alive. For now, Kendra added nervously. Yara stared at the tactical display showing the Dominion fleet. He's scared. Truly deeply scared. The question is whether he's more afraid of repeating the past or of trying something new. They waited 16 hours. Thrace dozed fitfully in the pilot's chair while Kendra monitored communications. Yara sat in the cabin, reviewing every detail of the Ascendant historical records, looking for any leverage they might have missed. When Zendar's voice returned, it sounded different. Older if that was possible. More fragile. We have debated your proposal. The council remains divided. Some patriarchs demand we destroy the Concordat as planned. Others are willing to consider alternatives. That's a start, Yara said encouragingly. It is chaos, Zendar replied, but with a note that might have been humor. We have never been divided on matters of such importance. It is uncomfortable. Perhaps this is what you meant about different perspectives creating understanding. It's exactly what I meant. We will send observers to your Citizens Forum. 3 patriarchs and their retinues. They will watch. They will question. If they report that your democratic system is as chaotic and dangerous as we believe, we will proceed with our original plan. And if they report otherwise? Yara asked. Pause. Then perhaps we will talk again. The Dominion ships broke formation, creating a corridor for the Meridian runner to depart. Return to your Concordat, Ambassador Castellanos, Zendar said. You have given us much to consider. We will contact you when our observers are ready. Thrace engaged the drives, guiding them away from the Dominion fleet. They were several light hours out before anyone spoke. Did we just prevent a war? Kendra asked. We postponed one, Yara corrected. Maybe. The real work starts when those observers arrive. Thrace glanced back at her. You convinced them to give democracy a chance. Do you really think it'll work? Yara looked out at the stars streaming past. I think Zendar and his patriarch spent 3 centuries building walls to protect themselves from change. But walls work both ways. They keep threats out, but they also keep possibilities out. Maybe, just maybe, we've convinced them to open a window. And if the observers decide democracy is as terrible as they think? Then we'll have to show them something so compelling, so undeniably better than autocracy, that they can't deny it. Yara smiled grimly. No pressure. As they accelerated back toward Concordat space, Thrace wondered what would happen when the Dominion observers arrived at the Citizens Forum. Would they see chaos and vindicate their fears? Or would they see something that challenged everything they believed? Either way, humanity's vote had bought them time. The question was whether they could use that time to change minds, or if they'd simply delayed the inevitable. In 72 hours they'd find out. The observers. The zenithum prepared for the Dominion observers the way a household prepares for visiting in-laws, frantically trying to make everything look more functional than it actually was. Absolutely not, Kesmora declared in an emergency hierarch session. We cannot allow enemy agents into the heart of Concordat operations. They're not enemy agents, Vornathel countered wearily. They're observers. And this may be our only chance to avoid a war we cannot win. We can win any war if we fight with unity and strength. We can't, Admiral Torrance cut in bluntly. The human admiral had been granted temporary council access during the crisis. Their fleet is larger. Their technology is comparable. And they have the advantage of having nothing to lose. They're already refugees from one apocalypse. They'll fight to the last ship. Quintel's many eyes blinked thoughtfully. Then we must convince them that democracy is not the apocalypse they fear. The Citizens Forum must demonstrate the value of distributed authority. By showing them chaos and disorder? Kesmora hissed. By showing them ourselves, Yara said quietly. Flaws and all. If we stage manage this, if we pretend to be something we're not, they'll see through it immediately. Our only chance is radical honesty. The Dominion observers arrived 3 days later in a ship that looked more like a flying cathedral than a military vessel. Gothic architecture translated into spacecraft design, all sharp angles and defensive posturing. Patriarch Zendar led the delegation personally, accompanied by 2 other patriarchs, Matriarch Sylvain, who looked even older than Zendar, and Patriarch Morgesh, who radiated aggressive skepticism. Thrace met them at the docking bay with Yara and a minimal honor guard. The Dominion delegation wore ceremonial armor that seemed designed more for intimidation than protection. Welcome to the Zenithum, Yara said formally. We've prepared quarters and full access to Citizens Forum proceedings. Morgesh's translator carried tones of disdain. We are not here to be entertained. We are here to confirm our suspicions about the inadequacy of your system. Then I hope you'll be thorough, Yara replied evenly. The first forum session with Dominion observers present was tense. Representatives from various species watched the newcomers warily while trying to conduct business as usual. The topic was resource allocation for frontier evacuation, a practical matter that had devolved into passionate disagreement. Drexval, the Meridax engineer, was arguing with a Bruthark logistics coordinator. We need transport ships positioned at mining colonies first. Those populations are larger and more vulnerable. Mining colonies have defensive infrastructure, the Bruthark interrupted. Agricultural settlements are completely exposed. They need priority. Both need priority, a Kestera representative interjected. Which is why we should divide available transports proportionally. Proportional to what? Drexval demanded. Population? Strategic value? Likelihood of survival? The debate spiraled into technical arguments about evacuation timelines, fuel costs, and defensive capabilities. It was messy, sometimes circular, occasionally heated. Thrace watched the Dominion observers taking notes. Morgesh's expression suggested he was cataloging every inefficiency. Sylvain looked thoughtful. Zendar simply observed with those ancient, haunted eyes. After 2 hours, Yara called for a preliminary vote on the 3 main proposals. The results split the forum almost evenly, requiring more discussion and eventual compromise. During the break, Morgesh approached Yara with barely concealed contempt. This is what you call governance? Hours of circular argument to accomplish what a single competent authority could decide in minutes. A single authority might decide in minutes, Yara agreed. But would they account for mining colony defenses, agricultural settlement vulnerability, and proportional resource distribution? Would they hear from people who actually live in those places? They would make the optimal decision based on strategic analysis. Whose analysis? Optimal for whom? Yara gestured to the forum floor. Every being here represents thousands who'll live or die based on these choices. Maybe it takes longer to hear everyone. Maybe it's messy. But when the decision is finally made, everyone knows they were heard. That matters. Sentiment. Efficiency requires. We know what efficiency requires, Sylvain interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The collective was very efficient. Right up until efficient decisions generated enough resentment that our subjects burned our worlds. Morgesh fell silent, his expression pained. The observation continued for days. The Dominion representatives watched the forum tackle resource allocation, defensive strategy, civilian morale, and diplomatic contingencies. They watched representatives argue, compromise, and occasionally fail to reach consensus. They also watched something else. On the third day, Riseth, the young Tolmec delegate, proposed a radical idea. Rather than prioritizing colonies by size or strategic value, prioritize by requested preference. Ask each settlement where they wanted to be in the evacuation queue, then coordinate accordingly. That's absurd, Drexval objected. Some settlements will request later evacuation out of misplaced heroism. Or legitimate reasoning, Riseth countered. Some colonies have shelters. Some have escape pods. Some have defensive capabilities we don't know about. Let them assess their own situations. The forum debated this for an hour. Eventually, they conducted a trial survey of 5 settlements. The results surprised everyone. 3 requested early evacuation as expected, but 2 requested later slots because they had better short-term survival capabilities than anyone realized. Morgesh stood abruptly. You just made decisions based on information you didn't have. The settlements themselves provided data that improved the outcome. That's yes. Thrace said, confused by the patriarch's intensity. Don't you see? Morgesh turned to his fellow observers. Distributed authority means distributed information. Each settlement knows its own situation better than any central command could. By asking them, by trusting them to assess their own needs, the forum made a better decision than any autocratic system could achieve. Sylvain nodded slowly. The collective always assumed subjects couldn't be trusted with important information. We centralized everything. And we blinded ourselves to reality. Zendar said nothing, but his expression had shifted from skepticism to something more complex. The real transformation came during a crisis. On the 6th day of observations, sensors detected a Dominion scout ship approaching Concordat space, not part of the observer delegation but a military reconnaissance unit probing defenses. Alarms rippled through the zenithum. In the Grand Chamber, Kesmora demanded immediate retaliation. This is an act of war. We must respond with overwhelming force. We must respond with communication, Quintel interjected. Perhaps they're looking for their observers. Or gathering intelligence for invasion. The debate raged in the council while the citizens' forum watched on public feeds. Then something unprecedented happened. Velshera, the Kestera priest in the forum, stood and addressed the observers directly. Patriarch Zendar, is this scout ship acting on your authority? Zendar looked startled at being questioned so directly by someone not of his government. No. The Patriarch Council authorized this observation mission only. No military operations. Then someone in your government is acting without proper authority, Yara said carefully. That's a problem you'll need to address. Morgesh's face showed something like shame. Some patriarchs opposed this observation. They may be attempting to force confrontation while we're here. Which means we need to resolve this quickly, Thrace added. Before it escalates. What happened next was chaos in the best possible way. The citizens' forum split into working groups. One contacted the Concordat Council, proposing that Zendar himself hail the scout ship and order it to withdraw. Another drafted contingency responses if the scout ship ignored orders. A third began coordinating with Concordat military to avoid accidental conflict. Through it all, the Dominion observers watched their own governmental crisis being managed not by autocratic decree but by collaborative problem-solving. Zendar transmitted to the scout ship. The crew, surprised to hear their patriarch's voice coming from inside Concordat space, immediately halted their approach. After tense negotiations, they agreed to withdraw, but not before their captain requested permission to share what he'd learned. "The crew of this vessel," the captain's message read, "wishes to know if what we've heard is true. That the Concordat has established a forum where common citizens influence strategic decisions. If true, we wish to observe as well." Morgesh laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since arriving. "Even our military scouts want to see this. We've become the opposite of what we intended, not conquerors but curious observers." Sylvain turned to Yara. "We have seen enough, Ambassador. The Council of Patriarchs requires our report." "And what will you tell them?" Yara asked. The ancient matriarch considered carefully. "I will tell them that we came expecting chaos. We found it, but not the destructive kind we feared. We found the chaos of voices seeking to be heard, of perspectives competing to find truth, of beings with different priorities finding common ground. I will tell them," Zendar added quietly, "that for 3 centuries we've built our society on the principle that authority must be absolute to prevent catastrophe. But I've watched this forum make better decisions than any absolute authority could, precisely because they distribute that authority. We were so afraid of becoming the collective that we became them in a different way, rigid, brittle, unable to adapt. And I," Morgesh said with visible difficulty, "will admit I was wrong. Democracy is chaos. But it's chaos that organizes itself into order. Chaos that heals instead of destroys. The kind of chaos that perhaps could have saved the collective if they'd embraced it instead of fighting it." The 3 patriarchs departed the following day. As their ship pulled away from the zenithum, Thrace stood with Yara watching them go. "Do you think they'll convince their council?" he asked. "I think they'll try. But changing minds that have been fixed for 3 centuries? That's a different kind of battle." They didn't have to wait long for the answer. 72 hours later, Patriarch Zendar transmitted a message to the Concordat Council. The Grand Chamber and Citizens Forum gathered together to hear it. Zendar's aged face appeared on the holographic displays. He looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "Members of the Galactic Concordat, members of the Citizens Forum. The Council of Patriarchs has deliberated. The vote was close, closer than any decision in our recorded history. But democracy, we have learned, is about honoring close votes." He paused and Thrace held his breath. "We will not attack the Concordat. We will not enforce submission. Instead, we propose an unprecedented arrangement, a peace treaty predicated on mutual observation and learning. We will send permanent delegates to your Citizens Forum. In exchange, we invite Concordat representatives to observe our governmental processes." Quintel's eyes widened across multiple spectrums. "You're suggesting cultural exchange? Institutional learning?" "We're suggesting," Sylvain appeared beside Zendar, "that perhaps both our systems can evolve. You showed us the value of distributed voices. Perhaps we can show you the value of experienced authority. Between these extremes, maybe there's synthesis." Vornathel stood, his crystalline form glowing brightly. "The Council of Hierarchs accepts this proposal. We will formalize a peace treaty and establish permanent diplomatic channels." Cheers erupted in both the Grand Chamber and the Citizens Forum, not the polite acknowledgement typical of Concordat politics, but genuine, emotional celebration. Thrace watched Yara's face. She wasn't celebrating. She looked thoughtful, almost worried. "What's wrong?" he asked. "We did it. We avoided war." "We avoided this war," Yara corrected. "But we've started something bigger. The Dominion is going to start experimenting with democratic processes. When their citizens see that, they'll want more. And when other autocratic species in the Concordat see the Dominion changing, they'll face pressure to change too. That's good, isn't it? It's transformation. Transformation is painful, even when it's good." She smiled slightly. "We didn't just prevent a war, Thrace. We started a revolution. A slow, peaceful revolution, but still a revolution." As the celebrations continued, Thrace realized she was right. Earth's vote hadn't just decided humanity's position on one conflict. It had introduced a virus into the galaxy's political immune system, the virus of democratic participation. The question was what kind of transformation that virus would create, and whether the galaxy was ready for the answer. The vote that echoed. 6 months after the Dominion Peace Treaty, the Galactic Concordat looked different. The Citizens Forum had expanded from a crisis measure to a permanent institution. 73 species now sent representatives, not just junior observers but officials with real influence over policy. The Grand Chamber still existed, but it no longer made decisions in isolation. Thrace walked through the Zenithum's diplomatic quarter, noting the changes. Species that had barely acknowledged each other now collaborated openly. The Vexian military had established joint training programs with former rivals. The Meridax corporations were experimenting with worker councils. Even the Kesthera theocracy had begun consulting their lay population on non-doctrinal matters. But the most dramatic changes were happening in Dominion space. Patriarch Zendar had authorized what he called consultative assemblies in Dominion colonies. They had no formal power, yet, but citizens could voice concerns and propose solutions. The patriarchs, to everyone's surprise, actually listened. It was incremental. It was cautious. But it was change. Thrace found Yara in her office, reviewing reports from across Concordat space. She looked tired. The past 6 months had demanded constant diplomacy, mediation, and crisis management. The Tolmec Breeding Council just announced they're implementing an advisory referendum system, she said without looking up. Citizens can petition for votes on major genetic policy decisions. It's limited, but it's something. That's good news, isn't it? It's complicated news. Yara finally looked at him. Reform is spreading. But so is resistance. 3 hierarchs have formally protested the Citizens Forum's growing influence. There are conservative factions in at least 20 species organizing against democratization. Backlash was inevitable, Thrace said. You can't overturn 11,000 years of autocracy without resistance. I know. I just wonder if we move too fast. If we push too hard. Before Thrace could respond, Kendra rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. Ambassador, you need to see this. Earth just broadcast something unprecedented. The holographic display activated, showing a live feed from Geneva. Secretary-General Okonkwo stood before the United Nations Assembly, which was packed beyond capacity. 6 months ago, Okonkwo's voice carried across space. Humanity held a referendum that changed our place in the galaxy. Today we're announcing a new vote. Not about war or peace, but about our future relationship with the Concordat and the emerging galactic community. Thrace leaned forward. What kind of vote? Okonkwo continued. We're asking every human to answer 3 questions. 1. Should Earth pursue deeper integration with Concordat governance structures? 2. Should we advocate for mandatory democratic reforms across all member species? 3. Should humanity share our democratic frameworks freely with any species that requests them, even if it destabilizes existing governments? Yara's expression shifted from concern to something like awe. They're voting on how revolutionary they want to be. The referendum will take place in 30 days, Okonkwo announced. This is humanity's choice. We'll abide by whatever our people decide. The broadcast ended. In the silence that followed, Thrace realized the implications. If Earth votes for aggressive democratization, he said slowly, it'll be seen as cultural imperialism. Half the Concordat will turn against us. And if we vote for cautious integration, Kendra added, species pushing for reform will feel abandoned. We'll lose the momentum we've built. But if we vote to share our frameworks freely, Yara said, we'll be giving every species the tools to transform themselves. No pressure, no imperialism, just available knowledge for anyone who wants it. That's assuming humans vote that way, Thrace pointed out. Yara smiled. That's the beauty of democracy, Thrace. We don't get to decide. We have to trust that 8 billion people, thinking and debating and arguing, will find the right answer. The next 30 days were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Earth's referendum became a galactic event. Every species watched as humans debated the proper role of democratic evangelism. News feeds broadcast town halls, academic conferences, public forums. The arguments were passionate, sometimes ugly, often brilliant. Conservative voices argued that forcing democracy on other cultures was exactly the kind of imperialism humanity had supposedly left behind. Progressive voices countered that democratic rights were universal, not cultural preferences. Moderates suggested that sharing knowledge was different from forcing change. Let each species choose their own path. The Citizens Forum, meanwhile, held its own debates. Should they support Earth's vote regardless of outcome? Should they prepare for potential backlash? Should other species hold similar referendums? Rissith, now a permanent Tolmec delegate, proposed something radical. What if we all vote? Not on the same question but on questions relevant to our own species. Show the galaxy that democracy isn't a human invention to be exported, it's a universal tool anyone can adapt. The idea spread like radiation. Within 2 weeks, 17 species announced they would hold their own consultative votes on various issues. Not binding referendums, most governments weren't ready for that, but advisory polls to gauge citizen sentiment. The Meridax corporations polled workers on labor conditions. The Braian colony ships surveyed residents about navigation priorities. Even the Vexian military conducted anonymous surveys of lower ranks about command structure satisfaction. It was chaos. Glorious, transformative chaos. On Earth, the vote concluded with remarkable turnout, 83% participation. The results came through at 1,400 hours Geneva time. Question 1, Deeper Concordat integration. 58% in favor. Question 2, Mandatory democratic reforms. 23% in favor. Question 3, Free sharing of democratic frameworks. 81% in favor. Thrace read the results with growing understanding. They voted for engagement without imperialism. Share the knowledge but let each species choose whether to use it. Which is exactly the mature, thoughtful approach I hoped for, Yara said with evident relief. Earth will be a resource, not a crusader. Partner, not colonizer. Kendra was already drafting the announcement. How do we implement this? What does free sharing actually mean? It means, Yara said thoughtfully, we establish an open-source repository of democratic processes. Voting systems, constitutional frameworks, citizen engagement protocols. Everything we've learned about making democracy work. We put it all out there for anyone to access, adapt, translate into their own cultural context. And if autocratic governments prevent their citizens from accessing it? Thrace asked. Then we've given their citizens something to strive for. And given reformers within those governments evidence that alternatives exist. Yara pulled up a communication template. I'll need to coordinate with the Scholarium. Quintel's people are the best archivists in the galaxy. If we're building a knowledge repository, they should host it. The Democratic Frameworks Archive, as it came to be called, launched 6 weeks later. Hosted on Scholarium servers and accessible throughout Concordat space, it contained detailed documentation of every voting system humanity had ever tried, including failures, constitutional models from federal to parliamentary to direct democracy, case studies of democratic transitions, both successful and catastrophic, practical guides for citizen engagement, adapted for various biological and cultural contexts, software for secure digital voting, election monitoring, and transparency verification. The Scholarium added their own contributions, historical analyses of democratic and autocratic systems across galactic history, with longitudinal data on stability, prosperity, and citizen satisfaction. Other species began contributing too. The Dominion shared their consultative assembly framework. The Meridax posted their worker council experiments. Even some of the autocratic species submitted anonymous analyses of what worked and didn't work in their hierarchical systems. The archive became more than a repository. It became a conversation. 3 months after the archive launched, Vornathel called an unprecedented joint session of the Council of Hierarchs and the Citizens Forum. The Supreme Hierarch's crystalline form looked different, more translucent somehow, as if centuries of opacity were finally clearing. When Earth first proposed its referendum, Vornathel began, I thought it was naive, dangerous, a threat to 11,000 years of stability. I was wrong. The chamber fell silent. I was wrong because I confused stability with stagnation. I confused authority with wisdom. The past year has shown me something I'd forgotten was possible. Systems can evolve without destroying themselves. Change can strengthen rather than weaken. He gestured to the assembled beings, hierarchs and forum representatives together. We have spent 11 millennia governing through hierarchy. It brought us peace. It brought us prosperity. But it also brought us complacency. We forgot to ask if our citizens were happy. They felt heard. If they believed in what we were building together. Quintel rose from the Scholarium delegation. Are you proposing formal reform, Supreme Hierarch? I'm proposing we vote on it, Vornathel said, and the chamber erupted. It took hours to restore order. When the chaos finally subsided, Vornathel clarified, I propose that the Council of Hierarchs authorize a Concordat-wide referendum. One question, should the Citizens Forum be granted formal legislative authority, working in partnership with the Council of Hierarchs? Kesmora stood, her serpentine form coiled with barely controlled rage. This is madness. You're asking us to surrender our authority to masses who lack our experience, our training, our long-term perspective. I'm asking us to share authority with beings who have perspectives we lack, Vornathel interrupted. Who live with the consequences of our decisions. Who might see solutions we're too removed to recognize. The debate raged for days. In the end, the Council of Hierarchs voted, 7 in favor of the referendum. 5 opposed. It was the closest vote in Concordat history. The galaxy-wide referendum was scheduled for 3 months later. Every member species would vote, those with existing democratic processes through their established systems, those without through hastily organized advisory polls. It was chaos. Magnificent, terrifying chaos. Thrace watched it unfold with wonder. Species that had never voted on anything were conducting crash courses in democratic participation. The Vexian military established secure polling stations. The Kesthera temples debated whether voting violated religious doctrine. The Tolmec breeding council nearly collapsed in factional disputes before finding compromise. And through it all, the Democratic Frameworks Archive provided guidance. Species adapted human voting procedures to their own context. They learned from each other's mistakes. They built something new from collective knowledge. Earth held watch parties across the solar system as the vote concluded. Thrace sat with Yara and Kendra in the Terran quarters on the Zenithum, waiting for results from 73 worlds. The count took 12 hours. When it finished, Vornathal announced the results to a silent galaxy. Should the Citizens Forum be granted formal legislative authority, working in partnership with the Council of Hierarchs? Yes, 64%; no, 36%. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Galactic Concordat had fundamentally changed its structure through the choice of its citizens. Yara watched the celebration in the Grand Chamber with tears streaming down her face. Thrace had never seen her cry before. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Thrace corrected. "You believed that one vote could change everything." "One vote." Yara laughed through her tears. "Thrace, this wasn't one vote. It was billions. 8 billion humans deciding to fight. Trillions across the Concordat deciding to reform. Every single being who participated in this transformation, they're the ones who changed everything." In the weeks that followed, the Concordat began the complicated process of reorganization. The Citizens Forum would share legislative authority with the hierarchs. Proposals could originate in either body but required approval from both. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was genuinely new. The Dominion announced they would implement representative councils with limited but real authority. The Vexian Armada established a military advisory board with elected representatives from all ranks. The Tolmec Breeding Council, in perhaps the most dramatic transformation, agreed to public oversight of genetic policy decisions. Change rippled outward in patterns no one could have predicted. 6 months after the Great Referendum, Thrace found himself back on Earth for the first time since the crisis began. He stood in Geneva, looking at a new monument in the plaza outside the United Nations building. It was simple. A circle of 73 stones, one from each Concordat member world. At the center, an inscription. They had fleets. We had a vote. Democracy wins when everyone speaks. Yara stood beside him, having returned for the dedication ceremony. "Do you think it'll last? All these changes?" Thrace considered. "Some of it will fail. Some species will backslide into autocracy. Some experiments in democracy will end badly. But I don't think the galaxy can forget what we've shown it. That people want voices in their own governance. That authority works better when it's shared. That votes matter. And if another crisis comes? Another dominion, another threat? Then we'll vote again," Thrace said simply. "That's what democracy means. Not perfect decisions. Just decisions we make together, owning both the successes and failures." Yara smiled. "When did you become such an idealist?" "When I watched 8 billion people prove that idealism works." As they walked through the Geneva streets, Thrace thought about the past year. Earth's referendum had been one vote among billions. But it had been the vote that showed the galaxy a different path. Aliens had fleets, massive, powerful, technologically superior fleets. They had autocrats and hierarchs and councils of the wise. They had 11,000 years of tradition telling them that authority must flow from the top down. But humans had a vote. And they'd shown that a vote could be mightier than a fleet. Not because democracy was perfect. Not because humans were superior. But because when billions of beings choose together, when they argue and compromise and find common ground, they create something no autocrat can match: legitimacy. The galaxy was changing. Slowly. Painfully. Sometimes backsliding before moving forward. But changing nonetheless. And it all started because one species asked a simple question. What do you want? The answer, it turned out, was the beginning of everything. 1 year later. The Zenithum Citizens Forum had outgrown its cargo bay and now occupied a purpose-built complex that rivaled the Grand Chamber in size. Representatives from 73 species worked in rotating committees, proposing legislation, debating policy, and collaborating in ways that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Commander Thrace Kelvin, recently promoted to Director of Democratic Outreach, stood in the observation gallery watching a debate about trade regulations. It was mundane, technical, and a little boring. It was beautiful. Risseth, now a senior Tolmec representative, was arguing passionately about tariff structures while Drexval the Meridax engineer proposed amendments. Nearby, a Kesthara priest and a Vexian military officer were finding surprising common ground on resource allocation. Ambassador Yara Castellanos joined him at the railing. She'd been promoted too, now serving as special envoy for democratic transition, helping species across the galaxy adapt to participatory governance. 3 new species requested access to the framework's archive this week, she reported. 2 from beyond Concordat space. Word is spreading. Spreading or metastasizing? Thrace asked with a slight smile. Depending on who you ask. Both probably. Change always looks like disease to those who benefit from stability. She gestured to the forum floor. But look at them. Arguing about tariffs like it's the most important thing in the galaxy. Because to them, to their constituents, it is important. That's what we gave them, the ability to care about boring, normal things instead of just survival and war. A chime echoed through the complex. Yara checked her communicator. Patriarch Zendar is on approach. He's requested a private meeting. They met him in a conference room overlooking the station's gardens. The ancient Dominion leader looked even older than before, but there was lightness in his bearing that hadn't been there a year ago. Ambassador, Director, he greeted them formally. I come with news. The Dominion Council of Patriarchs has voted to transition to a hybrid system. Within 5 years, we will have elected representatives working alongside appointed patriarchs. Within 10, we may have fully democratic governance. Yara's eyes widened. That's remarkable. Faster than I expected. Faster than we expected too, Zendar admitted. But once people have a taste of voice, of choice, they want more. Our consultative assemblies started as advisory. Citizens made them essential. We could either resist and create the very revolution we feared, or embrace change on our own terms. You chose adaptation, Thrace said. We chose survival. Real survival, not the frozen preservation we called life for 3 centuries. Zendar smiled, an expression that looked unpracticed but genuine. Your people taught us something, Director Kelvin. You showed us that asking what do you want isn't weakness. It's strength. It's the foundation of every stable civilization. He stood, preparing to leave. I wanted to thank you personally. Both of you. Earth's vote saved us. Not from war, from ourselves. After he left, Yara and Thrace sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars through the viewport. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the vote had gone differently? Thrace asked. If Earth had chosen withdrawal? Or if the referendum had failed somehow? Every day, Yara admitted. But that's the thing about democracy. You live with uncertainty. You trust that billions of people, thinking and choosing together, will find better answers than any single person could alone. And when they don't? Then you learn from failure and try again. She smiled. Democracy isn't about being right the first time. It's about having the humility to ask, the courage to listen, and the wisdom to know that the people you serve are smarter together than any leader could be alone. From the observation gallery they could see the Concordat stretching into space. 73 species, trillions of beings, all slowly learning that they had voices worth hearing. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. Democracy was messy and slow and sometimes made terrible mistakes. But it was theirs. Chosen, not imposed. Built, not inherited. The galaxy had fleets, would always have fleets. But now it also had votes. And that made all the difference.